Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moffat coming at you with another APGov video. We're continuing our tour of topic 2.2, taking a look at structures, powers, and functions of Congress. Last time we started to just kind of get the ball rolling a little bit in terms of how a bill becomes a law. We talked about introducing bills, but we mostly spent that time taking a look at resolutions. But, if you take a look at this flow chart here, as we said before, the first step is getting the bill introduced. Remember, anybody can write a bill, but it must be introduced by a member of Congress. And once again, it can be introduced either in the House or the Senate, unless you're talking about a revenue bill, meaning a tax bill, which means it has to start in the House. Today, what we're going to be doing is actually going through the traditional textbook process of how a bill becomes a law. And that first step, as you can see going back to the flow chart here, is that once that bill has been introduced in either the House or the Senate, then the next thing that's going to happen is that it's going to be assigned to some type of a subcommittee. So that's the very next step here. So what's going on here? Well, when we do talk about committees in Congress, this is where the vast majority of the work of Congress gets done. It is generally not flashy. It generally doesn't get hardly any media attention. But that is, kind of the run-of-the-mill stuff that a member of Congress does on a daily basis. That's where most of the work is. Now, a subcommittee is going to be receiving bills that are germane to its title. So it might be, for example, a tariff subcommittee, if you will. So it would only be focusing in on topics in that example on just would be tariffs. Now, when we get to working on a bill in the subcommittee, by the time you get your bill to the subcommittee, you might be really excited that, hey, I wrote up this bill and it's been introduced and it's sent to the subcommittee. All right, now the ball is rolling. Okay, now we're going to see some action. Except, for the vast majority of the time, that's as far as it goes. That's literally it. Because the fate of most bills is that when they get sent to subcommittee, they become what we call pigeonholed. Because that bill is thrown into the hopper with many other bills. And Congress only has so much time in a given term to address certain bills. And so chances are, once that bill has been introduced and sent to subcommittee, it'll be lost. It just won't be gotten to. And if that's the case, then that's it. That bill is just going to be, stuck in this never-ending line in the subcommittee, and it basically runs out of time. It just basically gets forgotten to death in the subcommittee. So it's kind of a sad thing. That's really where most of these bills end up at the end of the day. But moving forward, we're going to be talking about bills that defy the odds, those that actually do get attention in committee. So now let's assume that your bill actually does get some love from members of the subcommittee. And if it does, what's going to happen? Well, when we do talk about, the work of these subcommittees, you can see an example right here. It's a small group of members of Congress. Now in the House, those subcommittees are bigger than the ones that you see in the Senate because the House is, over 4 times as many people than the Senate. But as you can see here, this is a much smaller room than the full chamber. You've got here in this case, in this House committee, maybe a couple dozen members. And what they do is they're working on the language, the actual wording of what the bill is saying. And basically what they're doing in the subcommittee is trying to learn about the bill. Like, what is this bill about? What does it include? What's going on? It is very possible that in these subcommittees they will have what are called hearings. A hearing is where you are inviting people to come down and speak regarding the bill that is up for consideration. And these are folks that are going to be viewed as, in many cases, experts on what this is about. So let's say, for example, this is a bill that would create, more stringent emissions rules for factories. And, as a result, if you're considering this bill in the subcommittee, you might bring in, somebody from the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club is an interest group that is expert in understanding, how pollution affects the environment. So you might get that perspective. But, if you're talking about more stringent emission standards for factories, that could have potentially a negative impact on the ability of a business to make money. So you might have somebody coming down from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which represents business owners, and you might have somebody there say, hey, well, if you pass this bill, here's what's going to happen. This might affect business owners in this way. So what happens in these subcommittees is it's really about learning about the bill. What does it say? What would its impact be? In these hearings, if they have them, members of the committee will ask questions. It's really about finding information. And in the midst of learning about the bill, you then see members of Congress start to get their hands dirty into, talking about what they really want this bill to look like. Because even though a bill is introduced being written a certain way, almost never is that bill going to actually look like that if it ever becomes law. Because part of the design of the legislative process is to get as many hands as possible in the mix in terms of deciding what this bill is going to look like. So what happens in these subcommittees is that there's going to be a lot of what we call markups or amending. To mark up a bill, to amend a bill, simply means to change it, edit it, rewrite parts of it, whatever, to make it a more attractive bill so that more people would actually support it. Now, when we do talk about these things called amendments or just changes to the bill, the different chambers do have different rules regarding that. In the House, they have rules regarding germaneness. Germane means for it to be relevant to what we're talking about. So, if you are talking about a tariff bill, whatever you're going to be adding to that bill has got to be germane to what that tariff bill is talking about. However, in the Senate, they don't really have that rule. So you can have non-germane amendments. They're commonly called riders that can be attached to these bills. So you might have a bill that is, focusing in on, education funding, but then you can attach to it some sort of a rider, some sort of amendment that would create funding for a country music museum somewhere. It can be totally unrelated. A lot of times historically you would see these, riders, these amendments get tacked on these bills in such a way that they become pretty wild. They become pretty cumbersome. What started out as a, kind of a normal bill then just gets added on with all these different types of riders. It looks pretty wild. In the parlance of the chamber, they sometimes call these things called Christmas tree bills. In other words, like if the bill itself is like the tree, well, all the amendments, all the riders, if you will, become ornaments on there. So sometimes this stuff can get pretty wild. But bottom line, these bills are going to get edited, amended, marked up in some way, shape, or form. Almost never do these things just come out in its original form. Now, at some point, if the subcommittee is considering it and, holding hearings and, taking on amendments and whatever, then at some point you're going to have a debate on what the bill now looks like after it's been amended, edited, whatever. Now, if a majority of that subcommittee approves the bill as it looks now, well, then guess what? That bill now survives and moves on to the full chamber, or excuse me, the full committee. If it does not get majority support, then that bill is basically dead. They could come back and revisit it another time, but chances are, once it's shot down, they're not going to bring it back in that term. So if you are looking at the flow chart here, if you're able to, get out of the subcommittee process, now you're going to get to the committee process. So we're kind of going from here to here now. Once we get to the full committee process, it's very similar to what the subcommittee process is, except now you've got more people looking at it. Full committees are going to have a lot more people in it than a smaller subcommittee. And once you start adding new people to the mix, well, then they got to learn about what the bill is, and they're going to ask questions, and they're going to want to try to mark it up and make amendments and whatever. So you're kind of redoing that same process you did in the subcommittee, but now you're doing it with a bigger group. And if it is, amended in a pretty significant way and yada yada, that means it's going to get more attention, which means there's going to be more debates on it. And then, if it is getting that kind of attention, it's not going to get pigeonholed at this point. It's going to come up for a vote. And this is going to be important because if at this full committee stage you then get majority support in the full committee, well, then now it's going to be moving on, heading towards the full chamber. So, if you can get out of committee, let's say you're in a Senate committee, and if it gets approved by that committee, it will make its way to the full chamber, the full Senate. Now, that being said, what we've described right here is the committee process. That is the textbook way that things get done legislatively. However, if you're in, say, the House, if you come back up here, you can, if you can get a majority of the members to approve what's called a discharge petition. If you get 218 members, you can, once that bill's been introduced, if you can get it approved via discharge petition, you can completely bypass the committee process and get down to the Rules Committee here, which speeds up the process. So understand that there are, exceptions to this process. If you look at this flow chart, it looks like it's a very, formal, structured process, boom, 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 and it is, but there are exceptions that do exist that can kind of get around and bypass some of this stuff. So if we are talking about, a discharge petition, that's getting around the, the traditional committee process. Now, if you are in the House, keeping in the House, before that bill is up for consideration in the full chamber, the full House, it has to go to another stage before that. As you take a look here back on the flow chart here, it's going to go from subcommittee to committee to what's called the Rules Committee. So let's take a moment and talk about the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee is very significant because it determines what the debate rules will be for a given bill that is up for consideration by the full House. This committee is chaired by the Speaker. And once again, this is another example of the power that the Speaker has. And this is a formal power that the Speaker has. And so under the Speaker's leadership, and remember, things are very partisan in the House. Authority is very top-down. So you got to understand the Speaker is going to have tremendous influence of what's going to be happening in this Rules Committee. But basically what the Rules Committee will do for a given bill is decide on what the formal rules will be for debate for that bill. Some of these rules might be what we call closed in nature. In other words, they might decide that when this bill is up for consideration in the full chamber, the full House, that they won't allow for any more amendments. They'll just say, this is what the bill looks like, take it or leave it. They might say that, hey, we're going to limit debate to, 2 minutes per member or something like that. Or they might limit it to a sense of, we're only going to allow debate by the committee members that actually approve this bill. In other words, these are the folks that are experts on the bill already. They've worked on it. They're going to be the ones to, host the debate, if you will. However, though, the rules could be more open. I mean, they could allow for, amending to the bill once it's on the floor. They could do that. They could, have the opportunity for every House member to speak for 5 minutes or even 10 minutes or whatever, which is a lot of time when you add it all up. So notes, why does this matter? Well, a lot of times it affects speed. If you are wanting to get a bill through at a faster pace, well, then you're going to want to have closed rules. It makes it go through faster. If you want to slow down the process, or if you want to bring in more voices or whatever, then you're going to have more open rules. Now, note, in this Rules Committee, that bill could be amended again. That is possible. But note, once again, when we do talk about the Rules Committee, going back to the flow chart here, the Rules Committee is only found in the House. There is no Senate version of it. And there's a reason why. Because the Rules Committee focuses in on rules for debate. Well, in the Senate, there are no rules for debate. Every senator can speak for an unlimited amount of time on every bill. So there are no rules. There are no limitations. So you don't need a Rules Committee in the Senate. So that is a major difference between the two chambers. Okay? But if your bill gets through the Rules Committee, gets a majority support, then it will be coming down to the full House for the chamber's consideration. And that is where we're going to leave it in this video. So when we come back next time, we're now going to take a look at the legislative process once those bills make it to the full chamber, the full House and the full Senate. We will see you then.